What I want to do as a sort of introduction to the conference is actually sort of reflect very briefly on 4.5 years of robust, and actually we should also take into account 2 years of actually preparing this this project. So we're looking into a period of 6.5 years that I want to reflect on. And this is also mainly for the people that are not very familiar with the project. Just a bit of background information. It's a Horizon 2020 multi-actor research and innovation project. So it's funded through the European Commission's framework for research and innovation. Horizon 2020 multi-actor means that there are certain sort of requirements to the consortium that is doing such a project. It should consist of not only researchers or people from universities, but also practitioners, policymakers, consultants, etc. Quite often also referred to as sort of the end users of research findings. And the idea is that collaboratively you also develop a project like this, execute it, and also together sort of interpret the findings and the results. It was a call for proposals entitled Consolidated Policy Framework and Governance Models for Synergies in Rural-Urban Linkages that we responded to with our proposal. And we started to develop the consortium and project in July 2015. I actually sort of went back to the first emails that we sent out. And actually the very first one was on the 1st of July 2015, starting to look for partners. It was a sort of two-stage proposal, so a shorter proposal that we submitted on the 17th of February 2016, and we were among the two that were actually selected for submitting a full proposal, which we did on the 13th of September 2016, and I think somewhere by the end of the year we actually knew that we got the funding and sort of started with the work, met in June 2017. Formally, the project ends in about 2 months' time on the 30th of November 2021. There have been some changes during the robust timeline. I think when we started, and also which was quite central to the at least a lot of the calls in Horizon 2020, especially in the earlier, the beginning of the work program, was quite a strong economic focus. So if you look at the call text, in different bits and pieces, it focuses on enabling further growth and job creation in rural areas. So very much a sort of growth rhetoric that was quite central. Then COVID was there all of a sudden and has impacted our work quite significantly. For example, the conference we had prepared or at least mainly Alison and with the Luca team, prepared a beautiful conference in Luca, a rural and urban conference with sessions in urban areas and rural areas. And I think about 6 weeks before the conference would take place, we had to cancel everything. So 3-4 months of preparatory work down the drain, yeah, this is actually the final result. Again, something online, not in a rural or urban place, but that was the situation that we had to deal with. It has also sort of redefined rural-urban relations and interdependencies. Some things became much more important as a result of COVID, and I will touch upon that also in the first panel. In more recent years, climate change, biodiversity has come to the front, also through the Green Deal. And what we see more in general is a shift in focus from focusing on economic growth more to well-being. Also something that will come back today in the first panel, but also tomorrow morning's session is actually largely focused on this transition towards a more well-being economy, focus on quality of life. And I think what is also coming a bit more to the fore is this focus or the shift from a more sectoral to a more integrated approach, connecting, you could say, the links between climate change, food security, ecosystem services, food issues, agricultural issues, quality of services in both rural and urban areas. What we try to do with robust, and it's of course always up to others to decide whether we were successful or not in achieving those goals. I think we did, or are on our way to get there. To advance our understanding of the interactions and dependencies between rural, peri-urban and urban areas, and to identify and promote policies, governance models and practices that can help to foster mutual beneficial relations between the rural and the urban. And quite central to our approach, our multi-actor approach, was that we worked in living labs, 11 living labs, where researchers, practice partners, policymakers, people from small and medium enterprises and civil society organizations sort of collaborated, experimented with these new relations between rural and urban, with new sort of governance models, developing new kinds of networks. More about that in the panel also this afternoon, as well as 5 thematic communities of practice, where people from different living labs collaborated, exchanged experiences, knowledge, information related to specific topics. I'll come back to that in a minute. This is where the 11 living labs were located, or are still located. The project is still running. Some smaller, you could say, maybe a bit more rural municipalities, and all the way up to the big metropolitan areas like Valencia, Lisbon, and also the Styria metropolitan area in Austria. And in each of those places, we had a team of researchers and also of what we call practice partners, which could be local or regional authorities, or planning agencies, and on top of that, 2 umbrella organizations, sort of ICLAI, representing local governments working on sustainability issues, and Purple, the peri-urban region platform in Europe, which focuses on specifically peri-urban areas. And these were the communities of practice, and as this table shows, every living lab was actually involved in 3 different communities of practice. So there were people working on new business models and labor markets, on public infrastructure and social services, sustainable food systems, cultural connections, and ecosystem services. Those were identified at the start of the project as sort of important, you could say, policy and planning domains that have an impact on both the rural and the urban, and the interrelations between the 2. And so people met, discussed, shared findings from their living labs, also developed a sort of joint research and innovation agenda, developed publications together. And so a whole variety of different results came out of these communities of practice. If we look at the work plan, and this is what you need to do for a European project, sort of divide the whole project into different work packages that focus on different aspects of a project like this. And roughly, what we could say is that there are sort of 3 phases that we could sort of distinguish. The first 18 months of the project primarily focused on sort of doing a literature review of scientific literature, of relevant policies, and develop an action and policy-oriented framework, both conceptually and methodologically. And that was followed by a rapid appraisal of actually available data, existing studies, governance arrangements, planning instruments, and existing policy frameworks. So really a sort of quick scan of what is out there, also based on some of the projects that we have been actively involved in as members of the Robust Consortium. So if we would sort of compare that a bit to farming or food provisioning, you could say it was really about sort of preparing the seed bed and sowing and planting those first 18 months. This was followed by a second phase, and actually we sort of still also sometimes a bit there. It's not to say that these are very sort of distinctive phases, especially 2 and 3. It's sort of going back and forth. But the second phase was actually about sort of the growing caring, nourishing, and also first tastings, or a different way of formulating that was to let 1,000 flowers bloom, preferably edible flowers if we are sort of talking about food and agriculture. It was a lot about experimenting also within these living labs, sharing findings in these communities of practice. And then the last phase, which is the last 18 months, and which we're still in, is sort of about the harvesting of what we have sown, grown, cared for, nourished. Some things didn't mature that well, rotted along the way. New varieties sort of popped up. But it was about harvesting, tasting, preparing, and also eating meals together, sort of sharing also the successes of our collaborative effort, but also trying to make recipes for others, which is some of the lessons learned that could be also transferred to others. And one of the examples is the the rural learning hub, which Alison will explain more about tomorrow. So if we reflect on this on this harvest coming from this project, I would say it is a very rich and diverse harvest. We're sort of still trying to digest all the information that was sort of collected, the new insights that were developed along the way through work in these living labs and communities of practice. So I think we have an enormous set of inspiring and also well-documented examples of how to sort of foster synergies between the rural and the urban. And on top of that, I think we also were able to develop and improve our understanding of some of the common dynamics and trends also across living labs. So what are some of the commonalities that we see, while at the same time also being aware of the place specificity of rural-urban relations and of governing these rural-urban relations. There are many sort of differences in the way local and regional governments are organized across the 11 or the 10 countries that we worked in. And also at which administrative levels certain responsibilities lie. There is an enormous diversity out there. So what we want to do with this conference is also give you a flavor of this harvest. It's not the sort of the full harvest that we're going to present here, but give you a flavor, a taste of it. But please stay tuned to the website to actually sort of read, get familiar with the full harvest, and also the recipes that we will put on the website in the months to come. There's not only, I think, content that we need to focus on or reflect on, but also on the process. And working in living labs and across living labs in communities of practice was rather new for many of us. And there was also, I mean, there are living labs that have been set up and are working, especially in urban areas, but not a lot in rural areas, let alone on the sort of the interface of the rural and the urban. So for us, in that respect, it was also quite a learning by doing process, with ups and downs, with successes and frustrations. But I think in the end, we learned a lot, we did a lot, and can also actually reflect on this way of working, which is also promoted within the Horizon Europe framework. The term living lab pops up in quite a few calls for proposals. It's been a balancing act a bit, this way of working in terms of finding a balance between flexibility, sort of bottom-up processes, dealing with what is going on in living labs, and sometimes changes occurred because of municipal or regional elections and new local governments being in place, and this may sometimes had an impact on sort of the direction of developments, new priorities that were set, and at the same time there's a structure of the project that we had to deal with, the description of work, the deliverables, the milestones that we promised to deliver at the very beginning of the project. The initial plans that we had in some living labs, and also new local policy priorities we needed to deal with that. The diversity, the place specificity, but also the commonalities that we could find across. It doesn't really help to say, well, everything is so place specific. There are no general lessons to learn from this project. And I think also sometimes competing interests and diverging expectations between researchers and policymakers, between living labs and communities of practice, between local interest and the goals and the objectives of the project in general. I think one thing that we concluded yesterday, we had the first part of our final project meeting yesterday, that if you want to have sort of better impactful research and innovation, especially also at local level, even 4.5 years of project is actually too short. We did a lot of experimenting, I think, but also sort of really implementing new ideas, monitoring and evaluating that. The time span of a project of 4.5 years is simply too short. So, I think at the European level, if this is the idea to continue with living labs as a method or a tool for multi-actor projects, it will be good to consider a longer time span. Of course, it is all teamwork. A project like this, so I really want to thank all the robusters for actually contributing to the project. These are some pre-COVID pictures when we were actually able to meet in person. The upper one to the left is in Helsinki, and on the right, a bit more below, is when we had a meeting in the Lisbon metropolitan area. There are more pictures. But the latest one is just 47 faces with headsets on a Zoom screen, and I didn't want to do that as a picture. So that's my introduction to the to the conference. I want to thank you very much for listening to this, but also for signing up for the conference and sort of taking part in sort of listening to what we have to say in terms of results and findings coming out of the project.